First of all, I was told I would have 45 minutes for this talk, and I prepared for 45 minutes. But then they told me, no, you should let at least 10 minutes at the end for prizes for the people. I said, people don't want prizes, they want to hear my talk. So let's see, who wants a book as a prize? Some people? Who wants a PlayStation 5 as a prize? Oh, okay, I'm quitting, sorry. Taking this one with you. Okay, so then let's finish early so we can get all the prizes. You can get all the prizes. So I'm Laurențiu. Most of you maybe know me for my YouTube channel. A few of you maybe know me for the 3 books I wrote. You can join me online. You can ask me questions during the presentation at the end or on social media later if you want. Today, despite my outfit, my spring outfit, I will not talk about spring. I'm going to talk about technical debt. So I consider this a very important subject for any developer, regardless of the framework you use, regardless if you use a framework or not. Technical debt is, anything in this universe we live in is ruled by entropy. So entropy is, with time, the grade of disorder increases for any system, and that applies to code as well. So that's technical debt. Sometimes people ask me, hey, does that mean that even if you don't touch a piece of code, technical debt still increases? And the answer is yes, even if you don't touch a piece of code, technical debt still increases. How can I prove that? If you are in an organization where you have some old monolith, old piece of code somewhere in an wardrobe, maybe you are in that situation. Are you? Any of you? Some of you? Well, find a friend who has an old piece of code hidden somewhere and ask them to debug something on it. See the look on their face. That's basically why don't they like touching code, even if it hasn't been, let's say, changed for a long time. Because technical debt is not only coming with changing itself, but also with versions that are not upgraded, technologies that are not changed, and so on and so forth. Today, I try not to get you bored, and I will only tell you 3 stories from my own experience. And hopefully you will learn something from them, because it's always better to learn from others' experience than from yours. And it will, of course, be about technical debt. And most of the people see technical debt as an illness of the software. I kind of dislike this way of understanding technical debt, but I can see why this is the case. And that will come with my first story, where you will learn that technical debt grows silently and becomes more and more dangerous with time, same as an illness, same as eating fatty and having your veins covered by cholesterol. You don't feel that, but at some point you might be affected by it. You will be affected by it, actually. So my first, and of course, what's essential to remember is that technical debt being silently, you might end up at the point where you can't go back. And that's what I call technical bankruptcy. And my first story is actually about technical bankruptcy. And I call it the Italian startup because it was a company from Italy. Not that important anyhow. I can't tell you, of course, names and stuff like that because it's confidential and it would be immoral, but you can trust me that it's part of my experience. So at some point, as a consultant, one of the things I'm doing is auditing code. So I was called to help with auditing this code that was not even old, was quite a recent started application, but it was already messy. So I took a few weeks to look through the whole system. I can't really describe how the system looked like. I think the only good way to describe it is Mamma Mia. And I remember being at this desk with a part of the executive stakeholders, people who invested in that software that needed to be ready, and I didn't really have a solution for them, so I told them that from my perspective, there is no other solution than rewriting it. Where I don't really use the term rewriting. I usually am more polite and say revisiting it. But I didn't find a way. Of course, they didn't like my solution. I can't even call it a solution. Yeah, they didn't like my answer, and they asked for someone else who can provide a second pair of eyes. And of course, they laid me off. But about a year afterwards, I found out that they indeed went bankrupt because of the system. So most likely, there wasn't a lot that they could do about that system anyway. But of course, it's always best to have a second opinion, so I always advise that as well. Now, that's just to tell you that technical debt can indeed be dangerous if you don't consider it in time. And I always advise considering technical debt from the very beginning of writing a software system. So just remember that entropy is within the way our world works. So there will always be there, and you have to consider it from the very beginning. So yeah, but since you always have technical debt, as we discussed, can't we maybe find a way to use it? Like, why do we have to see technical debt only as something bad? Everything has good points as well. Let's treat technical debt maybe from an economical point of view. So what is good about, what can be good about technical debt? How can you use it wisely? That is the question. So let's consider the following scenario. You want to buy a new home. And you might discover that you don't have the money you need to buy a new home. But then, of course, there are solutions to this. You can borrow some money from a bank, and then you can buy your new home. What do you do, actually? What do you borrow? When you credit yourself, what do you get exactly? Do you get money? Yeah, exactly. Do you get time? So that's the most precious thing you actually get when loaning something. So that's what you can do sometimes with technical debt as well. And in the second story I'd like to tell you is about a successful way I use technical debt. But that came, of course, with a price, because like loaning money from a bank, you have to pay more later, than the amount that you borrowed. You pay for the time that you also borrowed. But still can be, in the end, useful. So I had another project also years ago where my client was using a third-party application within one of their departments. What's usually a problem with third-party applications is that organizations who develop them, they start having more and more clients, and suddenly they have a limit of the implementation time. So they, at some point, regardless of how many developers they employ, they tend to be slower and slower with the development. So they end up with not being able to satisfy all the requirements they are asked for. And that's basically the case. There's the organization that I was employed by was trying to find a way to speed up the development of new features, because their strategy, their business strategy was changing faster than the apps could be changed. So that's bad. You want to have your apps changed together with your business strategy to be in line with the market, to be in line with your competition. So how do you speed up, in this case, the implementation time? Instead of having a third-party application, you might have your own application that you customize yourself only with your features, exactly mapped to the business you have, to the business you desire. So what they wanted is quit the third party, build their own software. But there is a problem. When you pay for a license for a third-party app, you might know that the license is, it's not like paying for, I don't know, Zoom or Netflix. Like you pay monthly. You pay for years in advance, and you pay a lot of money. So you can't really afford to pay for the license and pay for a team of developers at the same time. Or you may afford, but it's really costly. It's twice the cost, isn't it? So how do you do to be able to avoid that? You try to implement a minimum set of capabilities up to the point where you have to renew your license. In my case, that was about 8 months. 8 months is not such a long time to build a software with a minimum set of capabilities. So I usually think very wisely if I would like to take or not such a responsibility. But in that case, their story was really strong, so I wanted to find a way in which I could help them with building that. So I had a few months, less than a year, to build a minimum set of capabilities in a way that they were working fine enough so they could work with that software, and the software was clean enough so you can like clean it better afterwards. So what did I do? I tried to loan time through technical debt. So I use technical debt the same way as you use credit from a bank. I left behind things that I knew they shouldn't be that way, the way we implemented them. But I always kept track of them, like I always keep track of all my debts. When I own something to someone, I always know that I have to pay back. And I keep that in my backlog, but responsibly, in such a way in which I know exactly what I leave wrong with the system, but I spend the minimum amount of time to build what I need. And with a very important thing that at the end, my stakeholders had to understand that once we release the first version, they have to immediately give me time to pay back all the debt, or at least the most important part of it. You can honestly never pay back all the debt. But there is an important part of it which you know it's that part that will affect you the most, and that if you don't pay it and in time, you will end up with that kind of software that will have to be rewritten. So instead of having a software that can live for like 20 years, 30 years, which is what we want in enterprise applications, we end up with a software that lasts for 2 years and then you have to rewrite it, and that's not a goal. In this case, fortunately, the stakeholders were smart enough to listen to me. So we really had a successful story out of it in the end. So we managed not only to build the first version usable, but also to clean it enough at the end in the next months after our first release. Why do I say smart enough? Because stakeholders sometimes they don't want to listen. And I know that some of you, because I know sometimes, from time to time, actually quite often, developers ask me, how is that you don't get pissed off that they don't listen to you, because they are non-technical, you are technical, you have the experience, so how is that that doesn't bother you? Who was actually at least once in a situation where they were bothered by their customer because they weren't listening, and you are not going into the right direction, but you still have to do that? Okay, a few people, quite a lot of you, yeah, so that's what I was expecting. Yeah, so I do advise the following. The way I see the things is I'm like a doctor. When you go to the doctor and the doctor tells you, hey, you have some health problems, say maybe you have some more kilos than you should, and they advise you try not to eat fatty and drink sugar things and sodas. If you leave the doctor's office and the next thing you do is drink a Coke and eat a shawarma, then it's not the doctor's fault that you do that. Same with applications. So if your stakeholders don't listen, It's not your fault that they don't listen. You have to keep that in mind. You are advisors, you are like doctors. The patient is, in the end, their own decision what they do with their lives. So try not to get stressed anymore about these kind of situations. They don't deserve it. So that's how we manage to use technical debt, actually. So whenever you feel that something is totally bad, remember there might be good things in everything, that even in things that may look or may be described as being totally wrong. So there are a few rules that I would like you to remember. Rules, I would say, from my experience. First of all is, remember, when you do have technical debt that you want to leave behind, put it somewhere, make sure that you remember it. If you don't log it anywhere, you will forget it. And it's not necessarily because you will forget it, but remember that teams change, people leave, new people come. The people who leave might not necessarily have written a detailed documentation. You might not have at all a documentation. The people who are coming, they might not necessarily get all the KT they need. Any kind of an organization is a living organism, so you can't just rely on the fact that you might remember what you do. If you have technical debt, you will not put it somewhere only for you to remember it. You will put it somewhere where you know that the team, the organization, knows it, remembers it, and can always evaluate or reevaluate its importance in a way in which they decide whether it's important or not, whether they need or not to take it now, or they can leave it for later, whether it's critical, and if they don't take it, it will affect the way they work, including the processes, maybe the stress of the team, and not only even the product. So the first rule is, you might have technical debt. That's fine. Everyone has technical debt. But make sure that you know about it. You discover it and you don't have time to clean it on the spot. Then you put it somewhere and you can count it in the future. It's always good to always clean it on the spot. That's called the Boy Scout rule. It's one of the other things I advise developers do. Whenever they work on something, they find some messy thing, it's something small that they can clean up front, do that. Clean that thing up front, even if it's not your code smell, even if it's not something that is even related to what you are doing at the moment, but you spotted it, and you have only two things that you can do. You either solve it at that moment, following the Boy Scout rule, or you put it somewhere because you discovered it. You don't want someone else to need to discover it in the future. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But you discovered it, you put it there, you maybe describe it the way you understand it at that moment, and then you are sure that sometime someone will decide to put it into execution. So we'll clean it up. So that's a very important rule number one. Another rule that I have and that I always use with the projects that I work on, so I do advise developers to take not only business implementations in a sprint. We tend to be very greedy because our stakeholders, our users might be greedy and they only want features they would like to implement. In the end, that's what they care, but it's not that they care more about their business implementations because they consider that the technical debt is not important. It's because they don't know what technical debt is. They don't know even that there is something as technical debt. So, and you will not be able to make them understand that. That's part of our job. So you know that, and you always have to consider technical debt exists, and that's something you need to address continuously from the beginning of your project. So if you skip one sprint putting the technical debt, you might then create a habit and skip another sprint, and skip another sprint, and skip another sprint, like a strike. If you put it in every sprint, you will create a good habit of always solving something, always solving something messy. Don't forget, you have to upgrade your versions. That's at least one thing that happens from time to time. Versions change, new versions appear. Next fall, we'll have Java 21. You have to upgrade to it. Okay? Who is still on Java 8 here? Okay? So that's technical debt. Okay? You didn't put in every sprint some technical debt, like at least upgrading my dependencies. Last week, Spring Boot 3.1 appeared. Who has at least Spring Boot 3 in production? Just a few people. See? That's not good. If you don't take the time to do that, the systems, again, they will be affected by entropy. And that's the world we live in. You can't stop that. The only thing you can do is address it. So change your mentality, change your ways of working, put in the definition of done, not only solving business things. Don't agree with your stakeholders in your sprint, only business implementation. I click that button, something happens. You should continuously address also non-technicalities and especially things that are related to technical debt, which, according to rule number 1, you know because you kept it locked in your product backlog. No? And then, one other thing that I do is I continuously measure the debt I have. I keep track of at least the fact that I have a stable addressing of the technical debt. I keep in track the fact that I solve enough so that my technical debt don't at least grow. I don't go deeper in the, you know, what's the next word, okay? So you have to address your new debt. Sometimes we do things like implementing quickly some things. We have a security vulnerability. You create a quick fix for it. You know that you should have invested more time, but you at least want to get rid of the vulnerability fast, and then you spend more time for implementing the full solution. I think that happened to you at some point, not necessarily with a security vulnerability, but something else, a performance problem maybe. You found a quick fix, but you know that that's not the real fix. You have an idea what the real fix is, but it takes a couple of weeks, and you want first to make sure that your users can work with the app. So you fix it now with a patch. What should happen with the fact that you know you need to write a real solution? It should go into the backlog, like according to rule number 1, and that should be kept in the measurement as part of the new debt that you have added to your application. So that's new debt. You have to remember it, to measure it, and of course, one of the things you'd like to know about it is also its urgency, its importance. So is it urgent or not? Is it important or not? How much important? Important enough that I have to start working on it immediately in the next sprint, or I can leave it for Christmas. Hopefully not everything should be left for Christmas. And you might know the quadrant telling you about stuff. Some of the things that we have to work on are both urgent and important. Some are important but not urgent, urgent but not important, and not important and not urgent. And there are cases where we keep working on the things that we consider urgent, but they are not really important at the same time, just that someone makes them urgent. Be careful that you know exactly when you solve the important things with priority and not necessarily the urgent ones. And the last story, and then PlayStation will be in the hands of one of you. I want to end the discussion today with telling you that I'm not necessarily a supporter of like heavily clean applications. Remember what I said throughout this talk is technical debt can't be eliminated totally from your app. Okay, you have to consider that. So don't go also on the other way of the hill, considering that you have to spend a lot of time and putting too many things in your definition of done, trying to polish everything you do. One of the reasons is our brains are built to consider things iteratively, to make easier to go over things. Now, I understand one piece of code in a way, and if I take it on Monday, so it's another iteration in my brain, I might see things that I haven't seen today. You know, that's how we work. That's how our brains are built. So if you try like to take a story and polish it, there are good chances that you will not be able to reach the same quality you would like, even if you allowed a lot of time, say, to polish it, rather than applying the Boy Scout rule, meaning leave things the way you understand them now, the things you think they are clean enough now, and then next sprint, or as some weeks after, you might revisit that code, and you might observe something that it looks to you that it could be better and it could be enhanced, and then you follow the Boy Scout rule, you change it on the spot, or it's something larger, you can't do that, you put it in the backlog as we discussed earlier. That's how we should apply things. So the story is about a team. Again, when I'm auditing software, I audit either the software or the processes in the organization. And this time was about the process, because the stakeholders were telling me, hey, we feel that that the team works too slowly. When I hear something like that, I'm always having a big smile on my face, because you stakeholders always think that we build things slow enough. So I didn't trust them. I'm usually on the team side. But in that case, the reality was that the process, which was really well documented actually, had a lot of things in the definition of done, some of them more or less useful. You don't always, for example, have to have your DBA department revisiting all the queries, like SQL queries you write in your application. That might make sense. You can understand that having some experts in the DB might want to revisit the fact that you say, select star from products. Yeah, big deal. You know, some things might need to be reviewed. Some things, if you just have them reviewed, you will lose a lot of time through ping-pong communication, stuff like that. And then indeed, you slow down the process. The question is, do you slow it down, but you also gain something? Because if the answer is not, then don't do that. Find another way to do it. Change your process to be efficient. You have to be profitable. You have the objective, the target is not necessarily the quality of the software, it's the profitability. On a long term, medium and long term, usually. And it's not necessarily having, from the very beginning, a lot of the code say perfect, quotes perfect, because it's not something that doesn't exist. Yeah, but if you tend to try to do that, you might end up having spending time making it less profitable than if you have to find that balance. You know, that's what you have to find. So in this case, we had to reorganize the working process and eliminate some of the things that we're doing in the definition of done to have things becoming more profitable with keeping the same amount of quality. Keep that in mind, that this could happen as well. And of course, we have some conclusions. Remember, technical debt needs to be considered, otherwise it's dangerous. It can lead to technical bankruptcy, which is what we call the moment when you can't go back, when it's too difficult to go back, you can't revisit the code and address the stuff, you have to rewrite it. It's basically when your product becomes non-profitable. But remember that you can consider technical debt as an economic tool. You can just take it as borrowing time, but do it wisely. Always keep track of what you know you have as technical debt, remember to put it in your product backlog. Always address your technical debt throughout the sprints. So always take technical debt and solve it together with business implementations. And remember to always solve first what's more valuable, what's more important, and revisit if something really is or not urgent. And that's what I wanted to tell you about technical debt. Thank you very much, guys. Okay, I have time to take some questions, and meanwhile, I invite my colleagues to also start the thing that we expected the most today. So if you have questions, you can tell me. I left on the last slide the way you can find me on social media, because maybe you want to discuss with me later as well online. So I'd be glad to answer your questions if you find me on Twitter or LinkedIn or YouTube. So, any questions? No, everyone wants the prizes, clearly. So let's make everyone happy. Let's make them happy. Come. So which should be prize, the biggest prize for today is the PlayStation or the book?
Every one of you to decide.
We start with?
The PlayStation.
We start with the PlayStation. Are you sure? Everyone will leave the room after the PlayStation. Okay, that's your choice. Start the PlayStation. Why did you leave me here? The PlayStation goes to Laurențiu Spilcă. George Crăciun Vasilache. Woo! Okay. You take the ticket, the PlayStation stays with me. You go to the girls there and they will tell you what to do, okay? Cool. Picture, photo. Okay, be careful not to. Oh, come. Let me touch it one more time. Ah, perfect. Okay, now the book. Do you have some napkins? I have to give them with the book for whoever wants to cry because they didn't win the PlayStation. So it's Ioana Camelia Muha or Muha, I think. Ioana Camelia, do we have you here? Oh no. At least she doesn't have to cry. She can cry later home. And then I will have to extract 9 more prizes for some ebooks. And I will do that quick. So it's Gabriel Sturza. Woo! We have Ana Maria Vizitiu. Nicolae Vieru. Cătălin Samson. Corina Samson. Okay. Daniel Leon. How many did I extract yet? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6? 3 more. We have Alexandru Frunză. Ana Maria Mihălceanu. You already have her, okay. She's a good girl. Or she doesn't want to read my book. I'm not sure exactly what. Alexandra Putnaru. And I have 2 more, actually. Huh? Or 1 more. One more, only 1 more. And the last one, Constantin Onofrei. Yay! Thanks again, guys. I'm happy to have been with you here in Iași. Now I think we are ready for the last keynote of the day, and we are free to go. Cheers.